So the final strain of E. coli we're going to talk about in our section is enterohemorrhagic E. coli. It's probably the most important strain you need to know about. In terms of the general picture, enterohemorrhagic E. coli affects the large intestine. Patients typically present initially with abdominal cramps and a watery diarrhea that progresses to a bloody diarrhea secondary to an enterohemorrhagic colitis in the large intestine. And it does this by the emission by the bacteria of a cytotoxic virotoxin that's similar to Shiga-toxin. This acts on the local enterocytes of the large intestine and inhibits protein synthesis. In terms of the diseases caused by enterohemorrhagic E. coli, really you need to think of two particular consequences of this infection. One is the local effect of developing a hemorrhagic enterocolitis, and then the other complication, perhaps the more severe complication, is the development of the triad of acute renal failure, low platelets known as thrombocytopenia, and a hemolytic anemia, and this forms part of hemolytic uremic syndrome, which tends to occur approximately a week after the beginning of the diarrhea. In terms of the actual causes and dissemination of the disease, generally the infectious dose of E. coli is foodborne transmitted, so generally in infected food. And an important reservoir for this strain of bacteria is the tract of certain cattle. Particularly, therefore, if you consume undercooked beef or, for example, food that has been contaminated with this actual bacterial strain, you're more likely to be a recipient of this type of E. coli and therefore develop the complications of an enterohemorrhagic E. coli infection. A particular serotype of E. coli that is associated with these infections is the 0157H7 strain. Particularly in the United States, this strain was associated with a number of cases of bloody diarrhea. So enteropathic E. coli is the second strain of E. coli that we're going to talk about in our series of Enterobacteriaceae. Enteropathic pathogenic E. coli, or EPEC, is slightly different from ETEC in that its mechanism of causing diarrhea is by its effect on the surface of epithelial cells at which it attaches and causes them to slough off. It's associated with diarrhea, particularly in developing countries and particularly amongst infants, and generally affects enterocytes, which are the surface epithelial cells of the gastrointestinal system in your small intestine. So we know that EPEC causes diarrhea. The diarrhea tends to be a watery diarrhea, and it occurs due to the bacteria adhering to the actual enterocyte and altering the internal protein secretions of the enterocyte, leading to ultimately to a watery diarrhea being secreted by the enterocytes themselves. It does this by affecting intracellular calcium and the phosphorylation of proteins by activating protein kinase C. By altering these signal transduction pathways and activating them, it changes the internal dynamics of the enterocyte such that there is alterations in the movement of fluid and the secretion of fluid by the enterocyte. Ultimately, what happens, therefore, is the secretion of a watery diarrhea from the enterocyte into the gastrointestinal lumen. And that leads to the watery diarrhea, particularly in the small intestine, that's associated with EPEC. So that's EPEC. To summarize, know that it operates slightly different from ETEC in that there are no toxins that mediate the diarrhea. Rather, it affects internal protein transduction pathways leading to the secretion of that watery diarrhea. Again, the general principles of management of this diarrhea are the same as they are for ETEC.